motion to take pound. Do stab trim brake real fast. Right. 790-120. Governors real quick. Yeah. So 7120, I think we're in. 101. We have a Sandy 01.
So tell me something about yourself.
I started flying when I was 15 years old. My father had a couple of businesses and a couple of airplanes and offered me some flying lessons, so started flying there in California on a Cessna 172 and enjoyed it. Had a ex-military fighter pilot as a mentor and trainer, and he got me interested in flying for the Air Force. So that's how I started flying.
All right, that's how you got into the Air Force?
I got into the Air Force after I learned how through the mentorship of my retired colonel flight instructor. Just told me the process. Had to get a 4-year degree at a university and applied through the Air Force officer qualifying tests, and then went through Air Force ROTC through University of California at Davis in Sacramento State, and ultimately had to get a degree. I landed up with 2 degrees and 4-year Air Force ROTC training. Graduated as a officer, and they offered me a jet training pilot slot.
So you were a jet training pilot? So what specific plane did you fly?
We started with a T-37, and then 6 months later graduated to a T-38 right there. And somewhere in the top 15% of pilots or so, they got offered fighters, and I was fortunate enough to do well and was offered an F-16 after a 12-year Air Force jet training school.
So you were an F-16 Hugh?
Flew F-16s, that's correct.
And did you go into combat at all?
No, did not go into combat.
I heard you had an interesting story about having to eject.
We did. When I got to my first unit, I was a young guy, about 24 years old, and after being qualified in the airplane, flying along, and there was a gentleman in the back seat, so we're up a 2-seat, there's one 2-seat F-16 in every unit for check flights and sort, and flying in out of Shaw Air Force Base, South Carolina. We were out just getting some training, playing around, and the engine, it's a single engine fighter, engine started to miss when we were coming back in from over the ocean into the coast. It was cloudy and a rainy day in South Carolina, so the engine started to miss just like it would in your car on a freeway, and it would miss 3 or 4 or 5 times. You could hear it sputter, and then it would run, and then it would sputter, and then it would run. And so I told the guy in the back seat, let's run the emergency checklist on the proper engine malfunctions, and in short, we did that. Didn't change anything, so we declared emergency and attempted to land at Charleston Air Force Base, South Carolina, in the weather. As we're flying on to final in the clouds, they vectored us onto a 7-mile final due to just weather for an instrument approach. And the engine coming down through 2,000 feet right as I dropped the landing gear to configure and land the airplane. We had practice bombs, full fuel tanks as heavy as an F-16 can be, and the airplane sputtered, missed, that coming through about 1,900 feet above the ground, and immediately the engine quit and all the dash lights came on. And I told the guy in the back, let's eject, and he said, no, hang on, briefly. This happened over a period of 4 seconds. Whereas we're in the clouds, the minute the engine quit through 185 knots, you can imagine with no thrust, the airplane went from here to basically falling flat. But in a matter of 3 seconds, you don't notice that. So he thought, as we fell breaking out through the clouds, that he saw the runway there, just in a 1 minute second, and ultimately said, I said, you want to ready to eject? He said, yeah, go. So I pulled the ejection handle, and in about a second and a half, if I recall, we were supposed to be in a parachute, but time slows down. and I can explain in detail what I remember very clearly. At 185 knots, which is about 200 miles an hour, I pull the hand grip and everything goes into slow motion. And I can explain, as I see the canopy blow off, an instant 200 mile an hour surge of air as the ejection seat fires, and I can feel it fire, and the air at 200 miles an hour hits me, and I'm falling through the air because the ejection seat leaves the airplane with us strapped in it. And then it's got an automatic release as the parachute is in the seat. We just connect the parachute to what looks like a fishing vest harness. So then I'm in the air, I feel the blast, it fills my lungs, so it's significantly hard to breathe. And then I'm falling through the air, which tells me that the seat has thrown me away as I'm falling with the seat, but then it throws me, and I'm thinking, where's the parachute as I'm falling? And then I feel the tug of the chute. It spins me about 90 degrees, and out of the corner of my eye I see a flash of the explosion of the aircraft hitting the ground in the woods in South Carolina. So little did I know that we fell from 1,900 feet through 800 feet in a couple of seconds. And so now I'm floating down in the parachute, and I'm so close to the ground without knowing it. Once you're in a parachute, the Air Force teaches you need to have a little song or dance routine. And it goes canopy, you look, yeah, I got a parachute, lift up your visor, take your oxygen mask off, look down, seat kit, then there's a little song you do. Then I'm halfway through that, and I look down, and here come the trees. And I think, oh my gosh, I'm going to get impaled by all of this debris that's down there. So I put my hands over my throat, eyes on the horizon, and as I'm crashing through the trees, I'm fearful, for the first time out of this whole event, I'm fearful that I'm going to get impaled by a branch. So as I crash through the trees, got my hands on my neck to guard my jugular veins, and I close my eyes, and I feel the crashing through the trees, and I come to a stop, and I open my eyes, and I look, and I'm hanging from a tree about 3 feet above the ground. So I go, wow, what just happened here? And it's raining, it's cloudy, it's in the middle of the woods, 7 miles from Charleston Air Force Base. The rain is quietly coming down, it's very peaceful. And I think, okay, I'm supposed to be in shock. I don't feel in shock. I think, wow, 20 seconds ago I was just up in an airplane. And this is very clear. That entire process, as I'm falling that I just described, till I hit the parachute, was about 1.5 seconds. And it was very detailed in my mind. I'm on the ground probably in 10 or 12 seconds after I hit the parachute. And now I'm sitting there quietly in the woods. As the rain's coming down, very peaceful, I'm thinking, let's not just release my shoulder harnesses, fall 3 feet, and break my leg, as you hear stories about in the military. So I decided to hang there for about 5 minutes thinking, okay, am I okay? Is everything okay? I check to make sure nothing's broken. I know I'm supposed to be in shock, but I don't feel that way, but they tell you you will be. So I'm there for probably hanging there 1 or 2 minutes, I'm guessing, and then I hear all 600 and I think it was 80 rounds of the 20 millimeter ammunition start to blow off of the airplane, because we had live guns on that. And it starts to fire off in the fireball. Now I'm thinking, this is not good. So I detach, I fall to the ground and hide behind the tree until all the ammunition blows off, because the airplane was about a quarter mile away. And it just pancaked in flat, exploded and burned. And once all the ammunition blew away, then I decided, okay, I'll go ahead and get up, check myself out, and I'm fine. I know they're going to come look for us, but we just fell off a radar. They thought we just flew into the ground, the radar controllers. We didn't have time to tell them we're going to eject. So they sent out the Chinook helicopters, those big double-bladed ones. And in about a half an hour, I could hear them flying over. And I figured my parachute's in the tree, they will obviously see it. And I look and they fly over and I'm looking and they're at about 100 feet above the trees and they just fly right by. They don't see me. And I hear it again and they fly right by and I go, well, they're obviously not going to see me. And what they're doing is honing in on the emergency beacon, evidently, that I believe the seat had in it. Now this was 24 years ago. So what I rapidly found out, as it's raining and it's cloudy, they're not going to see me. I'm out in the woods, I don't know which way to walk, and there's a lot of debris out there due to a hurricane that came in a couple of years before. A lot of brush, a lot of down trees, so it's difficult to walk. So I got out my survival kit that you eject with, that you check, and they have signal mirrors, flares, smoke. They've got a radio in there. So I start digging out the radio and I go to talk on the radio, but the signal's being jammed. I can't talk on it because evidently the ejection seat had a beacon in it that is sending out a signal. So I couldn't talk to anybody, was my understanding. So I said, well, I can't get a hold of anybody. The helicopter's still flying around. They're in the general area. So I said, well, I'll go ahead and I'll take these flares. And I put the flare in a flare gun. Then I have about 6 flares, I think it was. And I see the helicopter, so I point it up in the air, and I go to release this flare, and it doesn't fire. The helicopter's going by, so I quickly seat the flare again, hold it up, it doesn't fire. I throw that flare out, I get another flare, put it in, I go up to fire it, and it doesn't fire. By now the helicopter's gone. I go, okay, that's not going to work. Hear them coming by again. Again, it's raining. I go, this is great. I'll pop some smoke. I pop the smoke when I hear them, and it goes up about 20 feet, and the rain just beats the smoke to the ground. That's not going to work. It's raining, cloudy, so my signal mirror's not going to work. So I said, well, I'm out of luck here. So after the helicopters leave, they still don't see me. It's quiet, it's raining, but I can hear. I don't know if the guy in the back seat got out. I don't know if he crashed, died, I don't know. And I can hear some yelling, faint yelling, after the helicopters left, what I thought was a general direction. So it took me about an hour to walk a quarter mile through the brush, and I break out into this field, and the backseater's parachute is in the only oak tree in a 2.5 acre clean field. And it's hanging up there. And I walk over there, and there's nobody in there. And he comes walking out of the woods, and I see him, and he just, what happened? You know, amazing, are you okay? And that's the extent of the story. The helicopter eventually came over, saw us on the ground. The guy leaned out of the helicopter instead of picking us up and pointed, and we had to walk out about a quarter of a mile to a road. And we have ambulances and fire trucks and probably 50 search and rescue people that are out there, and we walk out and they immediately separate us, put us into separate ambulances, take us to the hospital, give us physicals and drug tests, and want to compare stories. That's the reason they separated us. And ultimately we were found not a fault of the aircraft accident, as we traced back. There was fuel contamination due to the day prior an aircraft tanker had done some air-to-air refueling with this airplane and pumped some bad fuel into it, and the fuel control nozzles and the fuel control got plugged up and ultimately stalled the engine. So as we were back flying, about a month later, flying overhead the airport, and how we got our ejection seat was we saw at the end of the runway, when an airplane crashes, they have to gather all the parts up, and they put it at the end of the runway, and I flew over, looked, saw the old crashed airplanes, went over there, drove over, found the parts to this airplane, and ultimately saw the ejection seat, and they allowed us to put it in our flight squadron for the remainder of the time that we were there. And when we left, they let us load it up and take it home, which is kind of the souvenir I have for that. Nobody was hurt on the ground. When the airplane hit the ground, it cleared out. They say just about 100 yards of debris and forest. Nobody was injured, and so we were all very fortunate with it.
So how long was your Air Force career?
My Air Force career was about 16 years. I did not complete it as I got hired to Alaska Airlines. I did 5 years or so on active duty, left the military, went into family business for 5 years. I did not fly. And by that time, my friends had been dispersed into various Air Force Reserve units throughout the nation, and we wanted to move up to the Northwest. So we sold our business and contemplated what do we want to do. And by that time, a couple of friends spoke well for me, and I interviewed and got hired for the C-141 transport position out of McChord Air Force Base.
All right. What did you finish your rank out as in the Air Force?
Major.
Major? How did you achieve the rank of major?
It's pretty routine. It's a normal progression through the 14, 15, 16-year point. You have to test, you have to do well, get certain awards, but it's a pretty normal progression for everybody.
And do you still work with any of your colleagues from your Air Force days?
Just now they're hired at Alaska Airlines, so yeah, we see them there.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Take pound. Do stab trim brake real fast. 79020. Runners real quick. Yeah. So 7120, hit the rim. 101.